What I think is going to happen is that the October case will go to trial in October. I don't think there will be a settlement because settlement is just way too difficult. I think we are going to lose. I think the plaintiffs win the Sitzer case. The number one thing we have to think about is copycat lawsuits. It will absolutely happen. And that's the most dangerous thing that people are just simply not talking about and not dealing with. Some random ambulance chaser suing you now for $20 million. Like, hey, I'll settle for 200 grand. I mean, that's what you're going to be facing. I mean,
so it's going to be a shakedown here.
It's going to be a shakedown. There's no question.
Hi there, and welcome to the Chris and Garry Show. My name's Chris Scott. I'm joined here by my partner in crime, Garry Creath, and we're here to talk about all things real estate. And we think we know a thing or two collectively, together, combined. We've been selling real estate, we've been in the real estate industry for over 50 years. And so we think we've got something good to contribute, especially with this particular topic that we're going to get into today. We have a special guest, Rob Hahn, who is helping us dive back into and really further explore these lawsuits, these big bombshell commission lawsuits that are affecting NAR and MLSs and the big brokerages.
Let's be honest. Everybody here in the real estate industry, we know who Rob Hahn is.
Notorious
ROB. ROB has been in the industry as long as I have. And what I would share with you is Rob is a real estate industry icon. He is a retired lawyer. He is a think tank, and he has something to say. And if you haven't heard of Rob Hahn, you definitely got to get to know him. And that is why you're here today.
And so we sat down with Rob because we wanted to really get an understanding of how much risk is there really, right? Like, is there real risk? Do I need to be worried? And here's the thing. And I'm going to call special attention to if you are a broker. If you are a broker, you need to listen to this entire message. You know, if you're a real estate agent, a practicing agent, you should listen to this for sure. But I'm calling a special attention to you. If you're a broker, you have to listen to this because you have exposure, you have liability. So please listen to this episode because Rob, I think, drops some amazing insights here.
So let's get started. Rob, is real estate a cartel?
First of all, great to see you guys. Thanks for inviting me on. So it gives me time to think. Real estate's not a cartel, right?
First off, for everybody here, what is a cartel? And then why is real estate not a cartel then?
So let's a couple of things. Number one, I don't know what the definition of cartel is. Like, I have mine. You know, it's like this organized like monopoly or oligopoly where they're attempting to corner a market or something along those lines. You know, it has a real negative connotation. Do I think real estate is a cartel? No, but then again, the current president of the San Diego Associate of Realtors called SDAR the mafia. So maybe SDAR is the cartel.
Maybe it's something they're working towards. Get a little bit more organized.
So there's that. But no, the real estate's not a cartel in that sense, right? Good. But I know we want to sort of talk about the commission lawsuits. And I think it's important to maybe get right out the front because in our industry, people like hear the word conspiracy and they just imagine the cartel, right? They imagine, Bilderberger Group, the World Economic Forum, Davos. They imagine whatever back room with, smoke-filled clouds. Like, that's not how it is, right? That's not what the conspiracy means in an antitrust context. Conspiracy simply means meeting of the minds. Like, we came to an understanding. We came to an agreement. And from that standpoint, of course, real estate is a conspiracy in that sense, right? Because everything about real estate is, hey, I have a house. I would like to sell it. Buyer says, I would like to buy it. We need to have a meeting of the minds. So there's some element of that, right? So I think that's how I try and answer that.
I like what you said there because it's not a conspiracy in the way that I think we would think of a conspiracy, right? It's not this whole huge publicized in the news media conspiracy.
Right.
But, for you to say it's a conspiracy, I think is still a little bit controversial, don't you think?
Well, I think that's why we have these lawsuits, though, right? Like, the fact that we have these lawsuits, they're challenging the way agent commissions has worked is because of transparency issues or the lack of understanding issues. Would you agree? Or is there another reason why this is coming to a head?
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, this is something that doesn't get mentioned a whole lot, but it's coming to a head after roughly, let's call it 80 years. In other words, if you go back and look at the first sort of real big antitrust thing that NAR was involved in was in 1950. And they weren't called NAR back then. They were called National Association of Real Estate Boards, I think, right? NAREB. So, or NARI, maybe real estate exchanges. I don't remember. It literally was before it was called NAR, right? They've been going after NAR around this commission thing since sometime in the 1930s. So this is long standing. And it's just been like one after another after another. And now here we are, kind of to your point, we've got to this point. And who knows? It might not be over this time around. It might be another 20 years, right? And then another thing. So yeah, it's come to a head. So almost by definition, if you have a trade organization, you have a conspiracy. Do you know what I mean? Like if you have codes of ethics that a bunch of competitors got together and agreed on, under antitrust standards, you pretty much meet the definition of conspiracy. Right? So the main issue that at that point becomes like, okay, is this a bad conspiracy?
Right. Is this fair to the consumer and everybody else?
Right. Right. Things like that. And then we could get into some levels of detail. So I know it's controversial because I think when realtors hear it, when we hear it, we think like, oh my God, it's, like I said, it's Klaus Schwab getting together in a dark room. Like, no, that's not legal definition.
Rob, here's the thing. When I, as a real estate agent and a practicing realtor, when I hear that real estate is a conspiracy, I'm like, what are you talking about? I've been working in real estate for 26 years, selling real estate day in, day out. This is what I do for a living. And I'm not conspiring with anybody.
I'm not. One might say that real estate's kind of a lonely business, in fact, that you're at it as a lone ranger on your own for most of it, it seems like.
Sure. So this is where things are going to get really weird and tricky, right? So there's a lot of evidence. There's a lot. In fact, I could probably go out right now and find something on Facebook where some agent is like, well, the seller's not offering compensation, so I'm not showing that house.
Right. Yep.
That's conspiracy. I don't know what to tell you.
I would agree with that.
I
would agree.
So what's
but Rob, it's like you get bad apples in every bunch. So to sue the entire industry over this is a little bit kind of wonky, don't you think?
It would be, except for, and so this is what I said when this lawsuit was first filed back in 2019. I think I was one of the first to like really write about it and really talk about it, right? From the very beginning, what I said is this lawsuit is all about steering. Right. Now, here's the thing we know about steering. It's against the law, right? Because as an agent, you have fiduciary duty to your buyer client. You can't not show a house, right, to a buyer client because you're not getting paid enough. That's illegal. It's a breach of fiduciary duty.
Sure.
It's against the code of ethics. It is unethical, right? At the same time, so I said that's what it's about, right? Here's the issue. The reason why the corporate defendants are being brought into this lawsuit, so the Realogy, Keller Williams, and Keller is the one that really took the hit for this because Houston Chronicle came out with the story like right in 2019, 2020, and they took the KW coaching manual, right? And you guys know KW, like, and it literally says, here's how you overcome a commission objection from the seller. You say, listen, I'm only charging you 2%, 3%, whatever it is, and here's all the valuable things I'm going to do for you. But listen, if you don't offer out the full compensation, these agents aren't going to show your house. This is what they put in their training materials. Now, the question is fine. So how prevalent is steering? Is this like 70% of buyer agents steer? Is it 7%? It makes a huge difference, right? The problem, though, for the industry is that when you put things like that in your official training manual, and there's video after video of big name coaches out there saying, hey, everybody, here's how you overcome a commission objection from your seller. Tell me the buyer agent's not going to show it. Like, it's got to be awfully hard to convince juries, convince judges. There's no steering here. Steering is illegal. Steering is against the code of ethics. There's no steering. It's just a few bad apples. It's got to be hard to convince them of that. That's the real issue.
And so why are all of these others? So like I think there are 5 named defendants in this, right? And then there are co-conspirators.
That's right.
And so are they finding the same sort of documentation through the other 4 defendants and the co-conspirators?
What do you mean by same documentation?
Like what you said. Like they must be finding some sort of proof
or evidence that they could use in a jury to be able to convince
conspiring like that to steer.
Right. Well, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of mention of steering in the complaints, right? So if you read the complaint, there's a lot of that talk. On the other hand, like the Massachusetts case that just got settled, the plaintiff's lawyer didn't even mention steering, right? It's like, oh, look, and pay us $3 million, and change these a couple rules and we'll go away kind of thing. At least for them, not for the brokers. I don't think it's quite that. I think the whole co-conspirator thing, because it took me a bunch of time to suss that out, right? Because I'm not an antitrust expert. I'm not a litigator. In fact, I'm not a practicing attorney, so nothing coming out my mouth right now should be construed as legal advice. Please go consult your own attorney, right?
Somebody document that disclaimer right there, because yes, for those of you who don't know the notorious Rob, he is a lawyer. He has been to law school, retired. But he does have some experience there. But this is not to be construed as legal advice.
Correct. Or financial advice for that matter. So having said all that, so we don't really know how it's going to play out. But I think the way the co-conspirator thing is working is, so I'm the plaintiff's attorney. I want to go sue. I want to do this huge class action lawsuit for whatever, $10 billion. I don't want to have to deal with more than 5 defendant attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because more attorneys you add, it just gets harder and harder, right? So what I want to do is just go after NAR and these 4 corporates, because I feel like I have really good evidence against them, win, and then go, hey, by the way, Mr. Keller Williams brokerage in Missouri, you were named as a co-conspirator, so now you get to come in.
Right.
And it could either be a new lawsuit. It's like, okay, now that I beat the big guys,
it's easier to drag them into it now.
Right. Because now if you're that broker, are you going to fight that?
Right.
Dude,
no,
right?
You're going to settle as fast as you can.
Exactly. So I think that's how this is all going to work.
And E&O insurance companies are going to...
No, actually, so insurance doesn't cover this at all.
Because it's a conspiracy?
No, because it's antitrust.
Oh, wow.
Most E&O insurances. So if you're a broker, you are listening to this podcast right now, the first thing I would do is go check your E&O policy and see if it covers antitrust defense. I can almost tell you it won't cover damages. Right? So if you were to lose or settle, you're on your own. The question is whether your E&O will pay for the lawyer to defend yourself or negotiate on your behalf in a settlement. Chances are it doesn't. Like I said, if I'm a broker, that's the very first thing I check right now, right? I'm pretty sure. So now you're going to be settling, and the problem is, do you have the money? The amount of damages involved are just so mind-boggling, out of this world, that I think, in a way, the industry as a whole, we've since this has become a bigger thing, this last 12 to 18 months, we've been hearing a lot of people talk about, here's what brokers and agents have to do to prepare. Here's what you must do in case this commission lawsuit. And almost all the conversation revolves around what a buyer agent should do. Like, you get an exclusive buyer agency agreement, make sure you show your value, that sort of thing. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, and I agree.
Yeah, well, we talked about this in a previous episode. You should be doing that regardless.
You should be doing that regardless, number one. And number two, but that's the agent. What doesn't get talked about is you may not have a brokerage to work for.
Right.
Because your current broker might be bankrupt and out of business because he's dealing with, a $10 billion damage, and his settlement is going to be $1.2 million. He's like, all right, well, I'm selling everything, or he'll just hold up shop. Cool, I can't pay any of it.
Let's move into that. Let's move from what this lawsuit is about. Let's actually move into what do you predict is going to happen? Because it's coming up pretty quickly in October, right?
What and when? Because I think that's another part of the issue. Is some people say it's going to be immediate. Other people say, hey, it could take a decade.
Yeah.
So what are your predictions?
So let's preface by saying no one has any idea unless you are actually on one of the lawyers negotiating. So I don't know. These are all just guesses, just based on reading the cases, reading what's been happening. What I think is going to happen is that the October case will go to trial in October. I don't think there will be a settlement, because settlement is just way too difficult. We could get into why that is. I think we are going to lose. I think the plaintiffs win the Sitzer case. It will get appealed, right? No matter who wins, it's going to get appealed, right? So it will be appealed. So it's possible that the whatever judgment will be stayed, right? So no damage will be paid, right? And it could be $20 billion. Nobody's paying it. It'll just get appealed. No, and then what happens after that? Who knows? We're talking years and years in appellate court, and so on and so forth, right? But more immediately, what will happen, no matter how that case, if that case goes against the industry, the number one thing we have to think about is copycat lawsuits. It will absolutely happen. And that's the most dangerous thing that people are just simply not talking about and not dealing with. Second thing is, it's not entirely clear that the defendants will actually be able to post bond for an appeal. Again, not something that gets talked about a lot. In federal court, if you want to appeal a judgment, you have to post bond that covers the cost of damages plus interest. If damages are $20 billion, there aren't that many companies in the world that can write a bond for that. And they'll be looking at like, are these guys likely to lose? Because if they lose and they don't have the money, we got to pay it. Yeah, so that's a whole separate thing over here. The bigger thing, I think, for brokers and agents, not for agents as much, brokers, MLSs, associate executives is, say you're in North Carolina, you're watching this happen, you're like, whatever, right? Missouri, let's see what happens. Yeah, the problem is once there's a judgment, your local ambulance chaser is going to fire up his laptop and come sue your ass, right? And then now what? Okay, now you have to defend it. If you're a broker, and this is the thing that really concerns me, in every one of these cases, like a large number of brokers were sort of pled in as potential co-conspirators, right? They're like, but I'm not Keller Williams, I'm not Remax, I'm not Realogy, I'm not Home Service, so I don't care. It's like, yeah, until that happens, and then the copycat lawsuit comes in. Some random ambulance chaser suing you now for $20 million. Like, hey, I'll settle for 200 grand. I mean, that's what you're going to be facing. And I don't think brokers
could be in a load of trouble.
Correct. And they're just, and that's the I feel like brokerages are not even thinking about that. Now, at some point, there's not enough money, right? I mean, there just is enough money. These lawyers are just after money. They just want to get paid. So it'll just start to expand, right? In other words, we start with the four largest, right? And then you go to the next level. So maybe they'll sue Redfin.
Like the large regionals, et cetera.
Large regionals, et cetera. And then they'll start suing like mom and pops, like.
But mom and pops with profit margins for brokerages, there's no money there.
I agree, but
many of them are selling they're selling real estate themselves, right?
I know. So that's the thing. So if you get sued by some attorney who says, hey, we're bringing a $3 million loss, whatever, we're pleading you into this case that was just done, total damages are $20 billion and you're going to be jointly and separately, like you're going to be liable for all of it. I tell you what, why don't you just settle, write me a check for $50,000 will go away. I mean,
so that's going to be a shakedown here.
It's going to be a shakedown. There's no question, right? And then, a lot of brokers will be like, okay, well, I'll call my lawyer, I'll call E&O. And they're like, man, don't fight this because these guys already beat Realogy. Like, what chance do you have? Just settle. Say, okay, cool. Can you settle it? Oh, yeah. So our insurance doesn't cover that settlement. So you're going to have to write that check. A lot of folks are going to be in a world of hurt, right? And that's immediate. That's no matter what happens to appeal, right? Because appeal could take 5 years. And then it's like it's business as usual until then. That's cool. But your brokerage, your MLS, your association just got sued by some local ambulance chaser. And your insurance is not going to cover defense costs. And it's not going to cover settlement. I'm just like, okay, what do you do then? I've not heard anybody talk about that in the industry other than me.
That's really interesting that you bring that forth because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of regional and local MLSs and boards.
Yep.
And they don't have the money to write these big checks.
Nope.
So are we potentially seeing a restructure of the entire industry?
Potentially, yes. I mean, something I talk about is, okay, so what happens if there is a broker who either settles early, right? So, hey, we settled, we're out. Or somebody says, well, I'll just start a new brokerage, right, afterwards. So you start a new brokerage, you don't have this liability.
Right.
Now you go recruit all the agents because you're an agent and your brokerage is like, I need to pay whatever, $3 million in settlements. So I'm going to need to raise the rates, raise our split. Every single agent just left your brokerage. It's a total restructuring. A lot of those brokerages, smaller ones, I think end up essentially folding up their doors and then they just join another brokerage that doesn't have a liability and they form agent teams. Now, here's one thing though, and this again, agents have nothing to worry about. There's no theory of liability in antitrust where the individual agent is going to get sued. I don't think. Right?
So you're thinking all of this liability and responsibility falls on the shoulders of the broker because the broker is the one who holds all the responsibility and liability in a brokerage. Very rarely do real estate agents get dragged into anything.
That's right. Now, I don't know. It's conceivable to me that this part I haven't investigated. So I'm like debuting this with you guys on this podcast. Depending on independent contractor liability, like how that's written, maybe the broker has some sort of claim against the agent for restitution. Like,
That's right.
hey, I got sued for this and I settled for this because you were out there steering clients.
Yes.
So you're going to owe me some like you're going to owe it back to me. I don't know if that's, so again, that depends on the independent contractor agreement. I will say that I'd be shocked if that existed in any independent contractor agreement in our industry.
Now, additionally, from what I've learned in being in the industry a long time, that is if there are even independent contractor agreements between the broker and the agent, because a lot of brokerages, unless it's a franchise operation, a lot of brokerages don't even require independent contractor agreements.
Yeah, it's shocking. So, we're talking about total restructuring the industry. And this is before we get to what happens to the MLS, what happens to local association, what happens to state association, what happens to NAR. So, like I said, everyone's focusing on the agent level. Hey, as a buyer agent, it's commissioned this, and then you need to do this in order to survive. I'm like, I don't think they need your help. Right? They're not the ones who really have to worry. I actually heard you and Chris talking about this sort of effect of things, and I think it's all really great advice. But I'm like, that'll be fine. The market will sort that out.
Agents can pivot. They can pivot very quickly.
Exactly.
We've seen them do it in the past. We can do it again.
Exactly.
Right.
So I'm just not worried about agents, right? Now, we can have a conversation what happens to agent population. I do think the number of agents will shrink pretty dramatically, right? Because I think, Gary, it was you talking about you need to show your value. Granted, so what percentage of agents do you think actually have any value? It's not over 50%, I can tell you that right now, right? There's not a single agent or broker who spent any time in the industry who thinks that half of the people who have a license today are actually any good. I think most would say probably 60% of people have no business buying and selling homes. They have no business advising a family on the most important, transaction of their lives. I think most people would agree with that. I'm just not worried about like the top 20% of agents or whatever the percentage is, right? The good agents who know what they're doing, they're going to figure it out and they're going to be necessary. People are not going to go spend $600,000, $700,000, like get into a 30-year mortgage without having someone help them. What I am worried about with this lawsuit are the institutions. I can't think of a single institution in real estate, in residential real estate, who would not be touched by this.
Yes.
And it's not clear to me that they survive.
Okay, well, let's break this down. When you say institutions, I'm going through my brain of thinking all of the different institutions that I can think of.
Brokerages, franchises, MLSs,
title companies,
title,
insurance,
mortgage.
Yeah.
All of it.
That's exactly,
You think
mortgage
all of
and
it.
mortgage and title less so, right?
Yeah.
Because those guys really have had nothing to do with commissions. What's interesting is how one of the judges in the Merle case specifically exempted auctions.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, in the class, if you bought or sold your home through auction, you're not part of this lawsuit. Well, yeah, because if you went through auction, you didn't pay a realtor commission, right? So of course you're gonna be left out. Which is why I launched an auction website, but that's a whole separate story. I'm saying so it's not every institution that way, but you're right. It's brokerages, it's franchises, it's the MLSs, the associations, and it's tech companies like Zillow, Realtor.com, Retrulia. Redfin's a broker, so Redfin's got all kinds of problems with all of this. It's not clear that any of those survive, and it seems crazy to even say that or to think that. But right now, man, based on the laws, I understand it. So just as an example, the Merle case, which is NAR and those 4 brokerages, in one of their previous back and forth, right? So in the summary judgment, he listed kind of what his estimate for damages will be. And he did it using a really generous, really very sort of liberal amount of damages. And he came up with $13.5 billion. And that's real low, right? That's really being pro defendant, right? Giving them every benefit of the doubt. If the damage is $13.5 billion, no one in real estate can pay that. Literally every company's bankrupt, right? My estimate was it's probably closer to $195 billion. At that point, there's not a single company in You know, like no one can even cover that. I mean, BlackRock, I guess, could. Like that's about it.
Very few organizations.
Correct. So we're just talking about wholesale wipeout if something like that happens, which is why everyone thinks there's going to be a settlement.
Are we talking settlement before they even come back, like before judgment? You think they'll settle before judgment?
Well, otherwise, you won't settle, right?
And so if they settle, right, because you have to settle before judgment.
Correct.
And so if they settle before judgment, then we're talking about what by the end of the year, early next year?
So one of the big questions to be asked is, will there be a settlement before Sitzer? That's the case going to trial in Missouri in October. A lot of times you have a settlement the day before the trial, right? Like a lot of these cases, because you wait till very last minute, pressure and everybody gets ratcheted up, and then you come to a settlement like 2:00 in the morning. So we'll see if there's a settlement in Sitzer, right? I personally don't think there will be, at least as far as NAR is concerned. I could see a settlement on the part of the corporate defendants, right? Because I could imagine like Realogy or, Keller Williams saying, you know what, let's just make this go away. We'll settle. NAR, I don't think could settle, right? Because the issue for NAR is going to be you want to eliminate the copycat lawsuits, right? Like it's one thing to settle Missouri, but then what about your MLS and associations in Hawaii or Alaska or South Carolina? Like what do you do about those? And some of these lawsuits, they don't cover every jurisdiction. So they want to try and do that. They can't by settling these, because if you're not in the lawsuit, you can't settle with them in a weird way, right?
Right.
So to do that, you have to expand the lawsuit to cover everybody, that cover the whole country, right? And cover every broker, every agent, every MLS, every association who's ever been involved for like the last 5 years. Since we haven't seen that expansion, I don't think there's a settlement, right? But doesn't mean that Keller Williams couldn't settle. Just like MLS PIN did in Massachusetts. They settled. The 4 corporate defendants are still in it. That is possible. So we might see that.
What do you think NAR's strategy is going to be here? Like if you had to take a stab in the dark about how do you think they should handle this strategy? Like how do you think they should handle this? Should they try and settle? Should they just take it to court? What do you think they ought to do?
Yeah, I think they should settle like instantly, immediately, because it's just really bad. I've been pretty critical of NAR, I think, in terms of this issue, not for the legal strategy, because look, they have some of the best lawyers in the world advising them, right? So I'll just assume that the legal side of things, they've got that handled. What I've been critical about is the fact that I'm fairly certain that a lot of your listeners, this is the first time they would have heard anybody talk about the prospect of widespread bankruptcy among brokerages, among the institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I
Local
agree.
associations,
this
MLSs.
Is the first that I've heard. Like for you to talk about copycat, for you to talk about widespread panic and bankruptcy, and basically, hey, agent, be prepared for your brokerage to shut down. You're going to need to go find a different broker to work for.
Be prepared for your local MLS to shut down. What do you do then?
Right.
Nobody's talking about this. And my criticism of NAR is like, look, but fine. You don't want to panic the rank and file, right? Like agents should be focusing on serving their clients, go out, get a listing, do your job, right? But I'm like, shouldn't you at least tell like the president of the local association? Shouldn't you do something? Just to be like, hey, everybody, here's some things you really need to think about and talk about. And like none of that's happening. So
now would be an ideal time to step up, start a national MLS, because as all these other MLSs go away, somebody needs to house that data so agents can continue to operate in the new age, not the dark age.
Yes. And I happen to have such an MLS.
I know you do. It's fascinating. You are absolutely poised in the best location possible to help agents and brokers out in the future.
In the future. But here's the thing. I hope that doesn't actually come to pass, right? I don't actually want to see every institution in real estate be destroyed, right? And hopefully we will come to some way to sort this out, some way to figure it out. I'm just answering Chris's question. If I'm an NAR, man, like I said, I get all my local presidents, all my AEs, all my CEOs, all the MLS board, the leadership. These are people who ran for office saying, I want to lead my association. I want to do stuff for my membership. Cool. get into this here room. We're going to close the doors and we're going to tell you what's up. They're not doing that. I don't get it. And it might be because, they're very knowledgeable, very high priced lawyers. Like, don't tell anybody. I don't know. But so that's the lawsuit. There's not a whole lot we can do about that.
Brokers, and there's a lot of organizations that are potentially screwed. The one I want to zero in on are brokers, though, because I feel like within our audience, we have a lot of agents and we have a lot of brokers who are tuning in. And so is there anything actionable that I could do if I'm a broker?
So actionable number one, call your lawyer. This is not legal advice. Okay? Call your lawyer. But if I were a broker, I would probably immediately stop offering compensation. Right. And if my local MLS will let me do it, I would I would have to find something else. I would immediately stop. The reason for it is there's a 5-year statute of limitations. Right. So for every year, every month that I allow my agents to keep doing compensation, that's another month of liability. Right. So at a minimum, I want to stop the bleeding. So I want to be able to say, listen, I only have 2 years of liability, right? So in the settlement thing, can I write you a check for $20,000 instead of $50,000? So that's number one. Number two, I would probably really look at selling my brokerage if I can, or shut down now.
If brokers shut down operations right now,
today,
and then open up a new brokerage,
bingo,
with a new broker ID number,
bingo,
new corporate name.
Yep.
Take your agents over there.
Yep.
Change your compensation to where we no longer compensate buyers, agents, and brokers.
Yep.
Are they not still liable under the old operation?
They are
Probably not, because they're protected by some sort of corporate shield.
Well, I mean, there's no. In other words, you shut down the company that would have liability today.
Right, but
shut it down.
So what you're saying is they would hold no personal liability if they were structured appropriately.
I think so. Again, please ask your attorney. I think so. Right.
That's something to explore, though, right? That's something to explore.
I would be shutting down my brokerage right now if I were a broker.
So I was thinking about this earlier. If that is the case, why has Keller Williams not already done that?
I don't know. Same thing with Realogy. It's a fantastic question. For that matter, EXP, some of the newer players, I don't know why they haven't done that, but they haven't. And I assume it's because my assumption is if you have an ongoing thing, right? And I go to my 100,000 agents, hey, everybody, we're shutting down. Right? Like,
that'll freak everybody out.
I think that's probably what it is.
You'd probably lose a lot of people in the process.
You would likely lose a lot of people. And, I think that's what it is.
Well, and then that begs the question, what's the harm in waiting to see what happens? And then when you get slammed with a judgment or they come after you because it's a copycat, at that point, you shut down and you inform your agents, hey, no big deal. We just shut down. We're changing brokerage names. That's it.
Yep. This is my gut feeling. And I don't have any, I haven't studied this because, this has to do with license law and a lot of that. I think my gut feeling on that, though, is that lawyers and judges are not morons. Specific judges. So if it's like, oh, hey, I just got sued. Hey, we're shutting everything down. Rob Hahn brokerage is no more. And then next week, here's a new brokerage in town, Hahn Rob brokerage. Right, ROB brokerage. And it's the same manager, same owner, same agent, same everything. And so the lawyer's got to be, listen, this is just a dodge. This is clearly just bull. And the judge could be like, yeah, it is. We're going to quote, here's the corporate veil. Whereas if I do it now and I get sued 2 years from now, do you know what I'm saying? There might still be an attempt, like you did this in order to avoid your legal liability. But it could be like, so you might be smart about it, right? I'll shut down now, go find a partner. So we start a new brokerage, right? So it's not ROB brokerage, it's Rob and Garry brokerage. Do you know what I mean? So there's enough of a difference so that the plaintiffs can't claim that you've been involved with this for the last 5 years. So you're right. This is exactly the conversation that needs to be happening with brokerages. Agents, you're good.
To sum up, for agents, be aware. Be knowledgeable. Keep your eyes wide open. See what's going on. And as always, be prepared to move if you need to. As an agent, you are well positioned to pivot in and out and do what you need to do. Be prepared. as a broker, call your lawyer. And I say that and then laugh, but I mean, I've been in that position in the past, and it's like, yeah, as a broker, we hold the responsibility, and so you need to have your lawyer on speed dial anyway, regardless of anything, because real estate is an extremely litigious business. It's just happening at a much larger scale. So much like agents, keep your eyes wide open, be prepared to pivot, but call your lawyer and get some great legal advice around this.
Yes.
And what you can do to prepare for it, and what you need to do to handle it and mitigate it in the future.
Right. And I think the question you need to ask is, again, we have a real hard time wrapping our heads around this. Get a good legal opinion on the size of damage. Like, it could be like, this is real low likelihood, but if it happens, it's this, right? And that's the risk analysis thing. It's like, hey, this event has a 90% chance of happening, but if it does, you're going to lose $1,000. Versus this event has a 1% chance of happening, but if it does, you lose everything. Right? I mean, so have that conversation with the attorney.
I think it's important, to really raise the awareness for brokers in particular that, hey, you can't just keep ignoring this. You can't just do business as usual. You'll suffer if you do. It's almost like a wake-up call. Don't ignore this.
Like I said, I've been invited to a lot of webinars, like for brokers who want to say, can you come and tell our agents how they could prepare for this, how to prove your value? Like, what is buyer agency, like buyer commissions and all of that? I'm like, look, there are lots of strategies for that. And I'm going, before we have that conversation with your agents, are you sure you're going to be in business? And they don't want to have that conversation. I'm like, dude, then fine, call your attorney, have that conversation, right? Same thing with MLS and associations. Again, this is not meant to be like some pitch for my business. But I will say, as a general matter, if you're a brokerage, you might want to start thinking about parking your data somewhere.
Right.
Because there's a real good chance that your local MLS is going to get sued and be out of business. It's like, so what happens
and
then?
We need the MLS to function.
You need the MLS to function, right?
On an hourly basis. We need it to function.
So, maybe think about, hey, should we have some, and again, like it depends. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be, maybe it's KWLS if you're a Keller Williams thing. Maybe it's something else. Maybe it's Zillow. I mean, who the hell knows? My point is, you might want to think about like, hey, so if that happens and my local MLS just shuts down, or conversely, they're not shut down, but they're out of their mind, just preoccupied with trying to stay alive. Hey, you got to do what's right for you. You know what I mean? You got to think about, how do I do business? And again, everyone's thinking about buyer agency agreements. Yes, do those. Prove your value. Yes, do that. Right. But a lot of the infrastructure we just take for granted is not certain. And I'm saying, so preparation says you should prepare. I think the brokers and agents who are preppers, like actual preppers, you know what I mean? Like
doomsday preppers, getting ready with the bunkers.
Like I have 3 weeks of water and 3 months of food, right? So my mind tends to just go in that way. If people who are preppers, I think, do think about things like, hey, what happens if the electricity goes out? Sure. And I'm saying from a real estate standpoint, think of it like that. It's not about your clients will certainly refuse to pay you. That's not the issue. The issue is electricity just went out.
Yeah.
And the stuff I've been counting on, relying on, no longer exists. What do I do? Like, that's the thinking I would be doing right now. Right?
I ask you a question, Rob. I'm curious because you mentioned earlier that you think that even, like Zillow could get pulled into this in some way. And, let's say I'm a broker who relies on Zillow for leads. Talk to me a little bit about why you think some of these tech companies are going to end up getting either going away or dealing with these problems.
So let's look at Zillow, right? I think they do something like $1.5 billion a year in revenue, right? Almost all of it is Premier Agent, right? Okay, what's Premier Agent? It's buyer leads. That stuff is really valuable today. When if I get a buyer, I show them us, I help them buy a house, I'm going to get paid 2.5%, 3%. Okay, if after this happens, I get a buyer, and the first conversation I need to have with that buyer is, so listen, if they don't pay me, you got to pay me 3%.
You need to pay me. All of a sudden, the value of that lead
went down.
Right.
Yeah.
And Gary, like I heard you, and you are exactly right on the previous. You can prove that value. I'm not saying you can't. Like say, listen, here's what I'm gonna do for you. This is why I'm worth the money. And chances are you're not gonna have to pay. But if you're gonna work with me, you need to sign this agreement that says, right? So the value of that just plummets. Number two, it's one thing when you're working with like a move-up buyer or an institutional buyer, like people like me. I'm like, yeah, Gary, you're great. I want to hire you. I'll commit to that. And if I have to pay you, write you a check for $25,000, no big deal. If I'm a first-time home buyer, I'm 31 years old. I'm 32. My wife and I are having our first baby. We are liquidating everything we own in order to make the down payment. And at that point, you're going to come and say, hey, you need to commit to paying me 25. Like, no. Right. It's like, I love you. You're great. I would hire you if I could afford it, but I can't. So that's the other reason why buyer leads will plummet. Okay, so now you're Zillow. What do? You go to an agent and say, hey, listen, it's time to renew your premier agent. And it's like, yeah, but like
it's not
that's
valuable
how it's
to
going to
me.
be impacted.
Those leads aren't valuable, so therefore
those leads are not as valuable to me. Correct.
No.
Right.
And so
that's
they
not
either
just
have to
Zillow.
adjust their pricing model to affect it, but that has all the downward impact of causing significant financial distress on them.
Correct. And that's not just them, right? It's them, it's realtor.com, it's everybody but homes, actually. Like it's everybody. So I think they could get hammered. A lot of vendors in our space are counting on agents, right? Like, the SaaS models, right? So I'm a CRM system and I want to have 25,000 agents because they're constantly sending out emails to their potential whatever. A lot of those agents will, number one, stop sending emails. What's the point? It's like, okay, yeah, I'm sending emails. Hey, are you looking to buy a house? Like, would you, there's a real question as to if I get a buyer, the very first conversation I have to have is, hey, can you write me a check for 15 grand? Like, do you still keep sending those emails out? What do you do?
Or you start working with lenders who will start wrapping it into the loan.
Correct. But so lenders right now can't do that, right?
No, but
by the way,
this is where banks are going to have to pivot. I mean, if banks want those loans, I mean, they're going to have to figure it out as well. So everybody in this whole deal is going to have to figure out how to pivot if they're still in business after everything comes down.
Right. Now, here's the thing. The banks can't do that without getting approval from the regulators. I'm 100% certain that NAR is talking to the regulators, right? The Federal Housing Finance Administration, all those guys. It's going to take a little bit of time for something like that to happen.
Sure.
Right. So in the meantime, this thing's going to hit pretty quickly. Now, here's the good news. You want to hear the good news?
In fact, there is good news. All of this, Rob.
There is, in fact, good news.
What is the good news?
The good news is, to me, the number one problem in the industry, right? When you cut through a lot of different stuff, one of the number one problem in the industry for agents is there are too many agents. There are like 1.5 million realtors.
There are not enough transactions in a year to feed these agents. There aren't.
Right. So it's possible it seems conceivable to me that when it's all said and done, right, we might see 80% of agents have to leave because, it's no longer like you get a real estate license and, sure, you got your license. Congratulations. Now you got to get somebody to pay you. And that's not the easiest thing in the world. So I could see a scenario where we, like maybe per transaction is lower, right? Like the commission amount is not 5%, 6%. It's like 2%. Maybe on the buy side, you're not getting a fee like that. You're going to charge hourly, right? But it could be that the agents who are left standing end up making a lot more money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Because they're the ones who can prove value. They're the ones who actually work hard. They're the ones who can showcase, that they're worth it. And when they're working with a buyer, it's no more of this like, let me drive you around for 200 hours and do all this work for you, and then you change your mind at the last minute, and I'm out of luck. Maybe it's like, cool, I would happily work with you. It's $50 an hour.
Yep.
And that buyer's not going to dawdle anymore. They're not going to just like calling you up to be like, hey, let me like.
Let's go spend the Saturday driving around together.
So it might actually end up being awesome for the agents who are left standing.
And to that point and to that end, and even further is the trickle down effect of that, Rob, is that it's going to be awesome for the consumer because here's what's going to happen. All of a sudden, they're going to get a much higher level of service, much more knowledgeable real estate agents because it's going to be much more competitive. I want all real estate agents to heed this. And that is, if you don't currently have that value proposition, if you don't currently operate in that top 20 to 40%, as Rob is talking about, you have an opportunity to do that for yourself and your business right now. Deals are not just going to fall into your lap any longer.
That's right.
You need to outcompete the other people who likely will be leaving the industry. And you can do that. Right. You just have to gain the knowledge, have the technology, and make sure that your contacts and connections are well informed of your differentiation. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
You got to be a professional. I mean, I think really what it comes down to, you got to be a pro. I've heard when the real estate market hits a downturn, I've heard people say that that's the professionals market, that professionals typically are able to work through the downturn. They're there at the beginning, they're there at the end, and they're usually thriving by the end of it, right? And so this is probably a very similar case. Is the professionals don't have to worry because the professionals always see things through to the other side of any market. And it's just going to be amplified. But the good news is you will now be compensated for your professionalism, whereas in the past, maybe not so much, right? Or not as well.
There's another level to this, which is like, don't lose hope if you're not a professional yet, right? Because look, you can't blame somebody who just got their license last year.
No.
Right? They're young, they're eager, they're willing to learn, but they don't have the value today. Cool. You know what happens after something like this? When the professionals are like, hey man, I'm handling these real complicated estate sale situations with 4 different co-owners and but I know somebody over here who's just selling their 1-bedroom condo. Why do you handle that for $10 an hour? Why don't you handle that for $20 an hour? I need to go help these people at $1,000 an hour. And that's, to your point, Gary, it's a much higher level of service. You could have a buyer. It's like, listen, I'm just trying to buy this condo. I'm just trying to buy this cookie cutter 3-bed, 2-bath in a subdivision with CM. Like, do I need Gary? No. I don't need your level of expertise and wisdom. Maybe I need one of your associates, right? And you could say,
all of a sudden, maybe teams become much more valuable of an offering in real estate. It's more of the legal structure of a law firm.
Right. So and then the young guy, you know what? You're doing the grunt work, you're doing the simple stuff, and you're learning along the way.
And you earn your way up.
You earn your way up. Eventually, you get your 5, 6, 7 years experience. You've seen situations, you've been in them, and now you're charging $200 an hour, $500 an hour. Like, I don't see any problem with that, and I think that really benefits the consumer because in many cases, I think consumers get too much service today, right? Like they're overpaying for service they don't actually need because they're not doing a complicated transaction. And in other cases, they're not paying enough. Like they're not getting enough service because now they're in a really complicated situation, and the agent they have is a newbie. It's like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I think it ends up helping everybody once we're past through the other side.
It's the short-term change. I think that's what gets us worked up. Long-term, it seems like there's a lot of positive things that can shake down as a result of this. I mean, in the spirit of focusing on the consumer, this is focusing on the consumer and giving them potentially a better outcome. It's just the initial change is what's scary. The thing is, though, it's usually whatever we are afraid of, it's usually not that bad. Usually it's a slightly, it'll be worse, and it's worse than what today might represent, but our worst case scenarios usually don't play out. It's pretty rare that our worst case that we envision for, said unknown, it's pretty rare that the worst case, it's usually somewhere in the middle there.
Somewhere in the middle. No, I agree with you. And like I said, if you're an agent, it's what you guys have been talking about and preaching all along. Get value, get knowledge, get trained, get all that. Because you'll be really valuable. If you don't have that value today, you know what? Maybe start charging less, right? Yeah. Like just be prepared to charge less and work harder and earn your way up until you are at the pinnacle of the profession. Nothing wrong with that approach at all. The people need to terrify are the institutional leaders. They're the ones who actually need to call their attorney right now after listening to this and have a real deep conversation, right? And do not just write this off because maybe it's not as the doomsday scenario. Maybe it's not as bad, right? But are you ready for anything?
If you got your head in the sand, then you're screwed, right? Like that's the thing. Right. It may not be as bad as you think, but if you're not thinking about it, then it's really bad.
Then it's really bad, right? Because somebody's going to show up at your door and drop a service of process on your desk, and you find they're getting sued for some ridiculous amount of money, and you have 10 agents who are like, if you've never thought about it, man, holy crap, imagine what that does. So I'm saying start at least prepping and thinking about it now if you are an institution. I would start there. There are the people who really need to focus on this.
Well, Rob, this has been enormously valuable. I think I've learned a lot. I know Chris has learned a lot, and I hope all of our listeners have learned a lot. You mentioned earlier that you might be able to help some brokers out, especially if they need to house some data and be prepared. Like if they need to be prepared and have those the months of food and weeks of water. Rob, how do our broker listeners get in touch with you?
Probably email is the best way. You could email me at rhahn, RHAHN at Decenter Labs, DECENTRELABS. It's the British spelling, y'all. But you could find me on Twitter at Rob Hahn. You could call Gary and be like, Gary, how do I get a hold of that crazy guy?
Well, we will make sure that we drop your contact information in the comments below. But Rob, this has been a delight and quite an honor. Always great to see you, my friend. Always. And thank you so much for dropping so many knowledge bombs on everybody here today.
You're so welcome. This was, I don't want to say, like, it was fun given the context of the topic, right? Because it's a pleasure to speak to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thanks again for joining us for another episode of the Chris and Garry Show here. If you like this episode, make sure you give it a thumbs up, like it. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel so that you get updates. And as always, drop a comment down below and let us know what you think. And make sure that you join us for our next episode.